Kia ora everybody and welcome back to another episode of Untidy. I am Matilda Green. I'm a content creator, mother of 3 children and 1 little Jack Russell called Buster who's sleeping beside me right now. And I'm here with my beautiful co-host.
Thank you. You're beautiful and bespectacled co-host as you are today, Maddie, looking very, very learned, I would say.
Look at us. Couple of academics.
A couple of academics trying our best with a clinical psychologist as our guest. I'm Hannah Davison. I am the mother of 2 and 1 dog who is sleeping on my slipper at this current moment and snoring hopefully quietly enough in the background. I'm the co-founder and author of the My Big Moments children's books, the books that help your little people through the big moments in their life. But today on the show, we're very excited because we're joined by Dr Victoria Thompson. So Victoria is a clinical psychologist working in a private practice in Ōtautahi Christchurch. Through her practice, she specialises in a number of areas, including child and adolescent mental health, eating disorders, forensic psychology, and couples therapy. She's a new mum to a baby boy, and in preparation for this recording, I gleefully discovered that she too is a victim of succumbing to the TV crack that is Maths Australia. We won't be unpacking the cast today, although it's tempting, but we did have a very fun time analysing the couples in the lead up to this episode. Now, Victoria has a particular interest in attachment theory, and this is a topic that we're excited to explore today. It's something we've mentioned on the pod before and wanted to get into, but it relates to who you are now in your relationships, how you show up in dating and conflict. It helps explain the dynamic we have with our parents, and it helps to inform how we choose to bring up our children. So welcome to the show, Victoria.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to be here.
Well, we're very excited to have you. But before we dive right into attachment theory, I have to ask, what is a forensic psychology and how did you get into that? Did you watch CSI? Did you get it from there?
I didn't watch CSI. But yeah, I mean, I started my career working in the New Zealand prison system. And since then, I've moved into private practice, but I still dabble in that kind of work. So I write reports and things for courts or lawyers, and they basically focus on risk of recidivism or risk of reoffending. So just trying to provide some guidance on what the likelihood is, essentially. Yeah.
God, it must be really sobering, actually, the kind of things that you're looking at and dealing with and balancing a kind of a knowledge of how that person came to be where they are doing what they're doing, and then what the state requires you to do in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really hard balance, balancing the needs of them and all of the heaviness that can come with their stories as well, immense amounts of trauma and intergenerational trauma, but also making sure that everyone in the community is safe and looked after. So yeah, it can be a bit of a tough one sometimes.
Yeah, I heard the statistic, and I know it's not relevant to New Zealand, but I was wondering if you could comment on how accurate this might be.
You're going to ask me to bring out some stats.
Yes, which I, you haven't been able to prepare for. No stats, but just sort of off the top of your head, was that there's a stat that something like 98% of people on death row in the States have experienced like severe abuse in childhood. It was something like that, like 98% had experienced severe abuse. Do you think that will be reflective of what we're dealing with here? Not that we have death row, of course, but I mean of like people who are offending with serious crimes.
I would say more often than not that we're seeing, the people that we see have experienced early childhood and childhood to adulthood trauma. Yeah, absolutely. Really impacting their attachment systems.
Yes, well done. Lovely segue. She knows what she's doing. All that could be an episode in itself. However, let's get back on track. So if the term attachment theory or attachment style is completely new to people, can you give us sort of an elevator pitch for introducing the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about attachment, it kind of stems back to attachment theory, something that came to be in around the 1950s and onwards from that. And what it talks about is essentially the relationship that one had with their caregiver, their primary caregiver, and how that relationship can impact later relationships that one might have with friends or intimate partners.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been around for a long time, but our understandings of it are forever changing and developing. And most recently, it's kind of taken off on social media, and people are really starting to become interested in what it means.
Do you think sometimes with social media and how people interpret psychological terms that it can also be sort of harmful as well? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but is attachment theory like it's a theory, right? So like it's not proven that there are these particular attachment theories and these are the only ones, and if you've got that, that's you. And I think sometimes it gets a bit sensationalized. Do you see that quite a lot on social media as well?
Absolutely. There's such a balance with social media, I think, because in some ways it's so helpful in normalizing psychological struggles or difficulties and familiarizing people with their own psychological well-being and aspects around that. The other side of it is that it becomes too kind of pop culture-ish, and it loses its meaning and also sometimes its importance or significance or severity. I think with attachment in particular, the mistake that perhaps is coming through on social media, in my opinion, is that people are seeing it as you've got this attachment style and so all the best, that's it for you.
Godspeed to you. Yes. You're stuffed.
Exactly. But what we know is actually attachment is, and maybe this is a bit confusing because I haven't quite explained what attachment theory is in its fullest, but what we know is that attachment is a continuum, and it is something that can change over the lifespan in different relationships and different situations. So I do think that that potentially can be scary and problematic for people when they think that they're stuck.
That's interesting. So what are the different attachment styles and how do we develop them?
Well, we develop our attachment style. And when I'm saying this, I'm talking about the continuum here, but most of us can lean towards a certain way, right? That doesn't mean that that's how we are all the time, but we might lean towards a certain way. But essentially when we're really young, that's when our attachment styles develop. So often the primary caregiver and the child, so that's the relationship dynamic in which it starts to develop. And so what happens is the way that that primary caregiver interacts with the child and responds to their needs shapes one's attachment system, essentially like the lens in which you see relationships. And so over time, that lens, like it shapes how you then go through later relationships in your life. Research is changeable on this. And like Matilda said, you know, it's all a theory and it's nothing set in stone, but in general, these are the types that one could have. So nowadays we have about 4 types that are most common and that people talk about the most. The first one of those being secure attachment. That's someone who is able to give and receive intimate connection and closeness. I'm not just talking about sex, I'm talking about connection.
Deep relationships.
Being able to communicate, express themselves freely and feel safe doing that. So most of the population are securely attached. So that's a positive.
Yep, we'll take that.
Chances are. The other one is anxious attachment, and that's where perhaps your caregiver was slightly inconsistent. And so you can be sometimes a little more worried about perceived abandonment. So what that could look sort of like in adult life is, say that you've started dating someone and then they take 3-4 hours to respond to your last text. Sometimes that can activate anxious attachment in people because they're wondering like, oh no, like they don't like me or they're not interested. So that would kind of be a really loose example of how that might feel for someone. The other is avoidant. So if you think about anxious and avoidant on a continuum, they're sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. People with an avoidant attachment style are quite scared of closeness. And usually that's because they had a caregiver who was slightly disconnected or emotionally not so available. And the last one is disorganized. And that's where you can kind of like quite abruptly flip between the two sides of the continuum. And often people with a more disorganized style have experienced trauma or neglect. So I think that's all four.
Yes, yes.
God, it's really fascinating, isn't it? And how do we find out what our attachment style is? Because I know there's lots of quizzes online, but are they kind of a bit more gimmicky?
Yeah, Hannah did ask me what quiz she
Because people are now going to be like, what am I?
Yeah.
How do I find out?
Yeah, I mean, there's ways, as you start to understand a little bit more about the various attachment styles, and then you might start to see bits of yourself that come through or tendencies that can come through that you might sort of tend towards to the avoidant side, that maybe you do find close connections with people really scary, or if someone's kind of wanting to make lots of plans with you in the future, someone that you're newly dating perhaps, that you could find that a little overwhelming and you might notice a need to kind of get a bit of distance. So I think in general, we can connect with certain parts of attachment styles. And of course, it's all dependent on the partner. If we're talking about intimate relationships, the intimate partner that you have and what they can bring out.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you actually, because what if your primary caregiver or a parent or whatever growing up was a really good parent and gave you everything that you needed, but then you get into a relationship with someone who is toxic or whatever, or the dynamic is unhealthy, basically. Can that then trigger different attachment styles? Because I'm just thinking, like, I feel like I had anxious attachment styles from these bad relationships in my teens.
Yeah.
But my parents are great, so how big a part are the relationships later on in life?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what we do as parents, as great as we are, obviously, we will do things that impact our child negatively. And that's not our intent. That is the reality of being a human being, is that none of our parenting is perfect. And we can talk more. And I know as well, as a parent, the panic that you have that you're going to, F your child up for life is real. So I definitely want anyone listening to know that this is, we're talking in general here and we're all just doing our best. So, and I guess what you're saying then, Matilda, is that it's a great example of like, you can be the best parents and the most supportive parents that you can, and life happens. So I think a good way to think about it is that kind of sets the foundation, and that's beautiful. That means you have a secure, if we're talking about you. Yeah,
we're talking about me, Victoria. Yeah.
Secure foundation.
This is how we get our help. We invite guests that we wish to question about our own lives.
Yeah, we just get like personal sort of therapy sessions.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. That you will have a nice secure foundation in which you're able to, now hold down a secure and loving relationship. I imagine. I don't know. We could talk more.
Correct.
But there are certain people that can come into our life that can activate small wounds that we have. And they don't have to be anything significant, but they're wounds. And then they can deepen those wounds and make it worse. So something about us, whatever we have, if you're leaning towards that more anxious style, that they have activated in you, and you in turn have activated something in them. And so it's not that it's set in stone when we're young, well, my parents were great and my upbringing was stable and I felt loved. That's amazing, and that's such a good foundation. But yes, of course, life experiences can impact our sense of safety in the world and the way that we view the world. Because if you think about, I'm yapping now, but if you think about
this is what we're here for. You go.
The security of your parenting, and then you go into this relationship with a person who does not feel safe or secure, you're going to go, oh, hang on a second. This is new. Oh, so maybe not everything is like how I thought it was. And actually that rocks a sense of self, and then you use mechanisms to try and keep yourself safe. Yeah.
See, I have this theory. We'll write off our questions, but it's all going to come in. That because I have a secure attachment style, but it means that I sometimes just make an unconscious assumption that other people are operating from the same basis of security, honesty, openness, values. And then when you get confronted with behavior that doesn't line up with that, because you're just kind of like, you're used to your own baseline, and then you see like and you kind of automatically assume that they have a similar baseline, and then when behaviors come out that don't reflect that, it's really jarring, and then that's what is activating, because you're like, whoa, I just didn't see that coming. Why would you want it? Why would you want to behave like that or treat somebody in that way or something like that? And then that's activating. But it's hard not to make an automatic assumption when you're just, going about the world through the lens of how you see it, and, making that kind of, and it's silly to make an unconscious assumption about people, but you can't help it because this is the lens that you're viewing the world through.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's not silly at all. It's the brain loves to make patterns, and that's how we form and make sense of the world. So we learn patterns really early on, and something that we call core beliefs or deep-rooted beliefs about self. And so that's how, through those, we relate to others. Some examples of some core beliefs that can be really challenging for people is beliefs that love is conditional, or I'm not good enough to be loved. And so we go through life with those as the lens. The other thing that you touched on there is probably the core issue of every couple that I see, which is you do not see the world in the way that I see the world, and I do not understand.
Yeah, it is tricky. And then I guess when those two people have a child as well, when you're both trying to parent that child the best way that you think you should, and when you're viewing that way differently, can be really tricky to navigate when you just flat out disagree on how to do something.
Totally.
We've all been there.
And I think that's an inevitable, isn't it? Because your context is different to their context. The way they've been raised is different to the way you've been raised. But I think whenever those things come up, it's always useful to think about one's intent. The intent that they have is to parent in a way that they think is best and fit, and it may not be the way in which you would do it, but it is the way that they think is best. So trying to approach it with compassion and curiosity rather than
I'm right, you're wrong. Yeah. And it's also like, you're on the same team. I think that's what it should always come down to. It's like, we both want the best for our children. We're both trying to do the same thing here, and that's just a great way to start off the communication. Like, we are on the same team. We've got the same goal. So let's work back from there and figure it out.
Also, very, very hard to be that balance, isn't it? When you're sleep deprived and you've got a million things on, of course, that further complicates the picture of trying to be empathetic and balanced. Speaking from personal experience.
There's only so much empathy one can have sometimes.
So if the parent-child dynamic that someone had growing up didn't result in a secure attachment style, like, can they hope for that journey to becoming more secure to take place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my opinion, no one's attachment style is fully secure. So I think that we can all flip-flop to one end of this continuum or other, and then we can, of course, come back to security with the right person. But, I mean, as Matilda's talked about, having experiences where a partner brought out your anxiousness, that you are then able to see that you can hold a secure, safe relationship with someone who is also secure, or at least secure that you've brought out the security in them.
Mm-hmm. And so how do people do the work on this?
A lot of the foundations of insecure attachment is a belief of self-criticalness or not being good enough, essentially poor self-worth. So a lot of the work that one has to do in trying to move towards secure relationships is around, essentially it's like, how can I be emotionally safe with someone? How can I feel safe enough to be vulnerable and to be able to communicate and offer my feelings? And part of that is like, well, my feelings are valid and they're important. And if you don't believe in yourself, then that's really hard to do. And so a lot of the work is around building up your own sense of self-concept. And that doesn't mean like, oh, you must be single and find yourself. And I think for some people that does work, but you can find yourself within the context of a relationship as well. But it's about building up your sense of self. Who am I? What's important to me? How can I rebuild beliefs in myself that actually what I think is important, how I feel is important?
And is that under the term reparenting? Is that kind of what that means, or is reparenting a separate thing?
Yeah, no, it absolutely can be. I mean, you've probably seen some stuff on social media around the like sort of inner child work. For those people who aren't familiar with that as a concept, the inner child is essentially like a metaphor for like all of the difficult and also happy emotional experiences that you experienced as a young person. And when we talk about reparenting, that's about doing work to show kindness to the child that maybe didn't receive it, or to provide things to your inner child that maybe they didn't get when they were growing up that they needed. For example, validation, kindness, empathy. So that is what we'd call reparenting. And I think that does apply for attachment, because you are teaching yourself and giving yourself those things that you didn't get. So yeah, absolutely.
And with the couples that you see, like, what are the common patterns that you see play out when people get into relationships?
Oh, can we talk about anxious avoidant? Now
let's get into anxious avoidant, because it's the worst one. Is it the worst one, anxious avoidant, or like what would be just?
Yeah, I think it's
a spectrum.
The thing is, it is definitely, I would say, the most challenging, because in general, people who are more avoidant on the continuum don't tend to get together because. Like
they're avoiding each other.
Yeah, they're avoiding each other. Neither of them have the impetus.
No one's going to text back in that situation.
Yeah, it's radio silence. So what tends to happen, unfortunately, is that people who sway more to the anxious side and people who sway more to the avoidant side get together, which, like, if you think about it, is just not a great mix, because one of them deeply desires closeness and one of them is absolutely terrified of it. And so
tricky.
Yes. So I would say that is probably the most challenging dynamic when people start dating. And it can play out throughout the relationship, because it can work, but it can play out in different ways. But anyway, so what tends to happen is, let's just say in general, an anxious person and an avoidant person get together, and it's all like hot and heavy and great at the beginning, as it always is. And then things start to change. And what happens is, the anxious person might start to feel like there is distancing. And that probably is the truth, because the person who has the avoidant tendencies is scared that things are getting too close. And that avoidant person is fearful of closeness, because for them in the past, closeness was scary and not safe. So they start to pull away. Not replying to texts, not wanting to make future plans are all sort of signs of that. Everyone, both of you nodding.
Yeah,
nodding vigorously.
Yeah. And so what happens then is the avoidant person is activated, right? And then they pull away. And so guess what happens? The anxious person gets super activated. And in order to soothe their activation, they start to come to, like, essentially chase, like, is everything okay? You know, do you want to make a plan on Saturday? Like, I haven't heard from you, da, 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 da. Or they might do something that we call protest behaviors, which is like, well, I'm not texting him. I'm not, you know, you can come to me. But actually both of them are so activated. So if they go with the line of, like, let me find out if anything's wrong, like, want to catch up, it pushes the avoidant person away even more. If they go with the one of, well, come to me, I'm not interested. They are obviously very activated and very, like, still interested. Then it gives the avoidant person that space, and that soothes their nervous system. They don't feel so activated. And so what always happens, well, not always, but let's say always, is the avoidant person comes back into the fore and they're more interested again. And the anxious person's like, woohoo, like, it worked, that's great. And then, of course, over time, we see the same.
The cycle continues.
The cycle continues.
And it's really tricky, isn't it? Because then the anxious person, again, speaking from experience, just relating it back to me, Victoria, I remember this exact relationship that I had in my 20s, and it was like just really confusing. So I was like, I feel like this is going well. Now you've gone weird. We're like, we enjoy each other's company. We're having a great time. Why have you gone all weird? And then it just makes everything be like, have I done something? Have I said something? And it's just constant, like, what's going on? It's just so confusing.
Yeah. And there's an example exactly of your activation of your anxious system, your threat system, saying, what have I done? I've done something wrong. Instead of the lens, which could be, maybe they're busy. And maybe they've got something on. You know, it's the lens in which you view things as, I'm problematic, not they're problematic, or that there's other things going on. Yeah.
But then, everyone seems a bit problematic in that scenario, you know? Like, the thing is that there's two people who have become activated and dysregulated.
Yeah.
And so they're only going to be able to come back together if they are actually able to regulate themselves and communicate what's going on. And then they also have to have the intention that they want to ultimately reconnect and keep moving forward together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can't keep going on like that and expect that a relationship is going to be sustainable.
Oh, but we do.
But we do. Okay, well, on that note, I want to talk a bit about modern dating and dating apps.
Yeah.
and like what we see in this zone, because, like, obviously I'm doing my time wading through the bog of eternal stench, always looking out for my sunny pontoon.
Bringing content for the pod.
Doing it for the pod, Maddie, always doing it for the pod. But I can't help but notice there are a large proportion of avoidant attachment styles on my travels, like particularly in apps. Is this a modern dating situation? Is it a dating app situation? Does gender play into it? What, from what you see, do you have a position on this?
I think dating apps certainly are highlighting how important attachment is in dating and relationships, because they've changed the game. I mean, the way that we date now is entirely different. It is disposable dating, and it can really trigger the attachment styles across the board. I mean, for avoidant people, people who tend to be avoidant, it's great in ways for them, because it can lead to more sort of superficial relationships. The idea, often with people who are more avoidant, they can have this kind of fantasy partner. Sometimes it's their ex-partner. Sometimes it's this idea in the head of, like, what it should be like. Like, I've seen it described as, like, the phantom ex, like this ex-partner that they had that they somehow, like, believed to be, like, the great love that they lost. And then it can also be like this idea of, like, what my relationship, it shouldn't be like this, or it must be like this. So essentially it perpetuates for avoidant people this idea that there is someone better out there, and that they can have accessibility to more sort of superficial, less intimate relationships. For anxious people, can be quite tough, because often you might not get a message back. It's very much about swiping, so it can really perpetuate feelings of not being good enough. It can be soothing for the anxious person as well to see that there are so many potential accessible partners. So it does different things for different attachment styles, but it certainly can be activating for all parts of the continuum.
I reckon, from my experience, that because I was having this conversation last night with my sister and some friends about like, oh, well, how do you become more secure? Like, how do you work to heal attachment wounds and stuff like that? And I actually said, dating has really helped me to become secure, because you are putting yourself in the position of getting activated again and again and again and again with different people in different scenarios. There's only so much of feeling like that you want to feel. So that actually leads you into that work where you really like explore it and work on yourself and understand how to regulate yourself and, you know, build up your sense of self-worth and all of that stuff. And I actually think, like, without having had so many horrendous dating experiences, that I wouldn't be as secure as I am now. Because when I began dating after my marriage ended, and I had learned about attachment, and so I did some quizzes, I knew what that looked like. And then periodically over the last 5 years, I've done like another quiz and another quiz and another quiz. And what I've seen happen over that time is the secure part of my attachment has grown. And I'm like, well, I'm attaching to myself is what's happening here. And I'm becoming more and more secure through, you know, as time passes, as I have more experience, as I do more work. So like, in a way, it's been wonderful, not just great content for the pod, but like, but like great, you know, great stimulus to work on myself. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. It's nice that all of those experiences haven't been wasted.
Yeah, absolutely. and you become your own secure base in which you can come back to self knowing, like, I'm okay. I'm fine by myself, and I'd like someone else to enter my world, but I don't need it. However, it can sometimes mean that people become increasingly avoidant.
Well, I would say that I put up with just a lot less, you know, like, sure. I'm like, you know, ghost me, fine, don't reply, fine, you know, like you've just, as soon as someone shows you who they are and you don't really like it, you're like, fine, you know, it's that, I don't know, I want to say it's that let them theory, you know, if they're going to behave like that, well, let them. But yeah, I remember my mum saying, I think my sister and I overheard her saying to someone when we were kids, like, I wanted them to be independent. I wanted to bring them up to be independent, but I think I've gone too far. Like, I think I've too independent. But I'm actually, yeah, and I am comfortable in that. But I don't know. Let's see. Watch this space. Anyway, we do have listener questions in relation to dating and relationships, and we'll bring them in as we go through the topic. But this is probably a good time to bring this one in. So if you are a primarily secure person, dating someone who has an avoidant attachment style but is self-aware and trying to work on it, should you adapt to them when they're activated and try to communicate and write it out? Or do you accept they can't offer a stable relationship dynamic and move on?
Ooh.
It's a real...
It's a doozy.
This is like a relationship is on the line here.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because you can understand why. I think it depends how willing you are to do the work.
Which one in the scenario?
Well, I think in general, right? Because if you want to walk away from it because you feel like you cannot get your needs met, then that is fair. You don't have to remain in a relationship where you feel like your needs aren't getting met with the hope that things will be different, because that can be really tricky for us because we stay in relationships desperately wanting that person to change, and that isn't fair. We should want to be with someone as the person that they are now. Of course, we all hope that some things will improve. What I always say is, like, you have to, if they were like this now forever, would you be happy? The other part of it is you've got someone who is seemingly self-aware and wanting to do work. Are you willing and able and wanting to be the secure base in which they can explore that work, because that's actually quite a powerful position to be in. Because part of working with like the more avoidant attachment style is exploring the idea of like modeling. So who in your world do you know that feels secure? What do they do? And how do they interact with people? Or a secure relationship. Say you have another couple in your life that you're like, God, I wish I had a relationship like them. I really like that they do this. Of course, like nothing's what it seems on the surface, but in general, a general kind of blueprint. So it would be possible that that person could provide that modeling, a sense of safety or anchoring for the more avoidant person, in which that they can learn that, hey, like closeness isn't scary. I can be safe and they're not going to leave or they're not going to push me away. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I always say with people, if you're looking at a relationship with someone, it comes back to like capability, capacity, and willingness. Like you've got to have the actual tools to be capable of being functional in a relationship, or be aware and developing those tools. You've got to be able to communicate and connect and all that sort of stuff. And then like capacity, like you can't have a completely freaked out, stressed person who's got no time in their life, that can participate fairly in a relationship. Like someone's got to have capacity for you. And then you've got to have the willingness on both sides. Like, do you want it? Do you actually want to be there? Are you interested in what it would take to be engaged in a connection? And so I think it does answer the question. I think and that would come down to willingness on both sides, because there's one person who obviously has to accommodate a lot more than the other person who's dealing with, their activation. And then they've got to be willing to actually, be in that discomfort and explore it and then do the work on themselves.
Yeah,
and
it's
and
asking a lot of both parties, but I suppose another lens is you're going to have to do work in a relationship. You could choose this as your work. It's not like there's not going to be a relationship in which you don't have to put in work. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's also about willingness and whether you see enough in the relationship that you are willing to make sacrifice.
Yeah. And on the flip side, the next one is, if someone has identified themselves as an attachment style which isn't secure and they aspire to create that within themselves, is learning and adopting behaviours of a secure attachment style beneficial, or should they accept themselves as they currently are but communicate effectively their needs to partners and friends, etc.? Basically, should someone try and change themselves or accept, communicate, and adapt their surroundings to accommodate their current insecure attachment style?
Well, I think that first of all, I think for sure we have to accept our tendency to respond to relationships with a certain attachment style, because if we're compassionate to ourselves, that's how we learnt to keep connections close, and that's amazing, to be able to adapt like that. And yes, of course, now we can say like, oh, it's not serving me now, but it has, and it might have in the past in some ways kept you feeling safe. And so I think if you're wanting to do things differently moving forward, sure, absolutely. We can all aspire to feel more skilled in the ways that we interact in the world, and we will be doing that until the day that we die. I certainly wouldn't want it to come from a place of feeling defective or that you need to kind of put on a front, because there will always be that tendency in you. Just learn how to manage it. Yeah. So I don't think that it's that you have to pretend, but it is helpful sometimes to act in the ways that a secure person would and see how it feels. And that doesn't mean that you don't feel anxious about doing that, but it is a different way of responding to situations which might be more effective than what you've been doing.
So there's a degree of fake it till you make it.
I think you're practicing. And we practice new skills. If you go to therapy, you might learn a skill, and there is a degree of faking it till you make it there, where you're like, I don't necessarily believe this, or I'm not buying this, or I don't know that this feels like me, but it's a different way of doing things, and I can be curious about what that might feel like and see if it is actually more productive for me.
What if that person is an avoidant person that we've just talked about, and they're sort of wanting to adapt their surroundings to, of course, no one can change their attachment style overnight, but in terms of adapting their surroundings to make it more comfortable for themselves, like what's that going to do to their relationships? Because I could just see that that person could end up burning through quite a lot of people by staying comfortable if they don't sort of work towards that security.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people who maintain an avoidant attachment style their whole lives, and that can be really challenging for them to hold down relationships. Like you said, that you are more inclined to burn through or to have more failed relationships if you have a more avoidant attachment style. And that's not to say you're doing anything wrong. I mean, I think it's just a way of being in the world. We're all just trying to survive. But certainly it will make your ability to have a long and meaningful relationship more challenging.
Is the activation, is this if someone becomes anxious, becomes avoidant, is this a stress response?
Yeah, I mean, when you have been activated, when you notice your own attachment system, often it's quite a physical response. And so it is a stress response, and it's a deep, old stress response that you've learned from, and you probably wouldn't be like, oh, well, it's when my mum, when I was 6 years old. It's not that necessarily. It's just more sort of small wounds. And actually, when we're babies, we don't even know how to regulate our nervous system. We don't have the capability at all. So we rely on the parent, let's say in general, mother, to regulate us. So when our baby's crying and we pick them up and we talk slowly to them, we're doing their regulation for them. They do not know how to calm themselves down without you. And over time that changes as they grow up. It's so sad.
Oh, sweet little babies.
Yeah. And they rely on you to model to them what to do. And that's true until, for ages, is that you're modeling to your kids how to regulate. And if you've got an unregulated parent, then that means that the kid will struggle more to regulate too.
So along the same vein as the previous question, this listener asks, I'm anxious avoidant, typically desire a relationship but can feel trapped and question everything when in one. How do you recommend mitigating the feelings of being trapped that avoidants can get?
Are they saying that they feel anxious in the relationship, that the relationship isn't right for them?
I couldn't tell you. It was written in, so I don't know.
I'm just trying to gauge.
I think there's like,
they're sort of disorganized. They're sort of a flip-floppy between the two. So often people feel really anxious in relationships about whether it's right. I don't know if that's something that you both have experienced, but questioning whether this relationship is right for you is really, really common. And of course, there's times in your life throughout the lifespan of the relationship where you really question it, and sometimes where it's not really on your radar. But I think with avoidant, the more avoidant side, the anxiety is often around it not being as they imagined it. So almost holding like really, really high expectations of what the relationship should look like. So I think, first of all, for that person, it's beautiful and really encouraging that they have self-reflected in that way and been like, gosh, when I get close, I really struggle and I start to get anxious about whether this relationship is right or that it's getting too close to me. I mean, understanding yourself like that is so important and the first step. But it's also asking questions about like, what is so scary to me about this deepening connection, and where do I think that this comes from? And also questioning their future and what they want. I want a long relationship, a monogamous relationship, if that's what they want. So thinking as well about where they want to move towards and what are some of the barriers that they might be putting in the way as a means to avoid closeness and connection, and whether those are actually serving them.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. The next question is, I really like this one. I'm sick to death of all my married friends saying they are secure. Like, no shit, bro. Try dating in 2025. Does the attachment style conversation primarily relate to people who are single or newly in relationships rather than those who have been settled for many years?
In pop culture, I think that we definitely look at attachment so much more for single people and dating. And I think it's also incredibly helpful to date successfully and like quote unquote smartly, because like you said before, Hannah, you were saying I've got like a less, I don't know if these were your words, but you essentially said like, I take less bullshit. And that's because you also know what you're looking for in terms of their ability to connect in with you and their attached, because you understand more about what are my needs and can this person meet them. And so I think with single people, yes, I think it's talked about more. However, with couples that I see, attachment is always at the forefront because everyone has an attachment style and attachment wounds, and it goes through all facets of us. It's not only our intimate relationships, it's also the way that we relate to co-workers, it's also the way that we relate to friends. So I just don't think it's talked about as much. But I can see, one of the most common things that I see in therapy is this communication trap that couples often get stuck in, where one partner is trying to initiate a conversation about feelings or something that they were unhappy with, and the other partner totally shuts down. And that is just another version of an activation, an attachment wound. And so it plays out certainly in relationships all the time. And so, yes, I think that your married friends all say they're secure, and that's really frustrating, understandable. It's probably not the most helpful thing to hear. I think it would be interesting to find out what their attachments felt like when they were dating before the marriages that they're in, because they may have experienced activations of their attachment system in similar ways, but they luckily managed to find a partner who allows them to feel much more secure and cared for, so that they're not activated so much. But yes, I would argue that there are certainly times in their relationship where their attachment systems are activated, whether they're aware of that or not.
I would argue that too.
Yeah. Because and I reckon that this stuff shows up in conflict, like you say, like when someone's trying to pursue a conversation, and then the other person is shutting down. Like so for people who are listening in a relationship, what should they be paying attention to determine if they are in, functional or dysfunctional relationship dynamic in terms of how they're attaching to one another?
I think first and foremost, it's looking at the way that you communicate. That, like you said, Hannah, that is often the way that it can show up as a really good tell of whether you've got stuck in the pursue withdraw dynamic where one person's coming toward and the other person's shutting down. Couples can also get stuck in cycles where they just avoid each other entirely, sometimes for days, weeks on end, and just not having any conversation at all. All of these things are manageable, but it does ask for some frank reflection on what are my defense mechanisms when I feel backed into a corner or I feel criticized. And I think that sometimes we just have to be really self-aware of our own patterns that we can get into in our long-term relationships. And sometimes we don't even know because we've been doing them for so long that you just get stuck in the cycle.
Yeah, sometimes you just got to take a good hard look in the mirror. And what kind of conversation starter could you suggest for someone wanting to bring up this topic with their partner?
I mean, you could always start at the beginning with, understanding a little bit more about their childhood and what were their relationships like with their mum, their dad. I mean, we're living in a world now where the way that we used to be raised, which was by the village, more people, we're just not having that anymore. And so we have kind of less buffer almost. Even if back in the day you had like a mum who's struggling to connect with you, you might have an aunt, it's like your auntie or your grandma who could provide that kind of secure base. We don't have that so much now. That was a tangent, but
but the truth, it's the truth.
But finding out a little bit more about what their relationships were like, how did they feel, how were their emotions responded to when they made mistakes, what was that like for them, what happened when they got hurt or upset, what were the expectations of them, that you can find. And you wouldn't just find out about attachment now, you can find out about so much. But that can be a really nice lens for fostering empathy towards your partner as well. And one of the things we talked about before was, you don't see the way the world in the way that I do, and I don't get it. And then understanding those parts of them can be really helpful to be like, oh, well, no wonder, because, you felt like your emotions were shut down, and look at me I just shut down their emotion. So of course it's activating for them.
I was like sort of laughing internally about that. I'm like, oh, you can't ask that stuff on a first date, but man, you want to.
Oh, you so want to.
So how's your relationship with your mother?
Yeah.
Well,
I have asked that before.
Have you?
That was something that my mum always told me growing up, actually, because we know our mums have, they've got some gold nuggets, don't they? But she always said to me, in a potential partner, always look how they treat their mother, because she said, like, how they treat their mother has such a strong connection to the respect they have for women. So, like, if they talk to their mum like shit and if they don't have any respect for their mum, a lot of the time that can reflect their respect for women. And I found that really fascinating, because it's, in my experience, it's kind of been accurate. And I've found that very interesting, actually. But because, I mean, like, people can obviously be estranged from their mum or whatever for lots of different reasons, but in general, I think it's a pretty good marker.
That's a good one. I'd say you also want to meet the mother, which is, again, tricky to do on a first date, because you're like, what kind of woman am I dealing with here? Maybe the grandmother, the great-grandmother, you want to understand what the intergenerational trauma is. Mm-hmm. It's not easy out there, let me tell you.
Yeah, are they a bloody narcissist? There's a lot going on, isn't there?
Oh, there's a lot going on. Victoria, you've become a mum recently yourself. So how was that transition for you, particularly knowing what you know in your profession and how you think about attachment with you and your baby?
Shit's scary, I think.
That's great to hear.
You realise how important the role is. Oh, God.
Look, I can't pretend like it didn't foster panic. Like, it worries me, of course. In ways, sometimes I think, sometimes too much. Not saying I know everything, but I mean, like, if it's your job and you work with people who've experienced childhood trauma all the time, you panic that you will traumatize your child. But having said that, I always anchor back into this the knowing and the self-soothe of, I am just trying to do my best, and that is all I can do. And luckily for me, well, for all of us, the research backs up that idea as well. There has been like quite recent research that has suggested that if you're a good enough mother, and we're just talking about mums for this research, 50% of the time, all good. And what I mean by good enough mother is like being responsive, going to your child when they've hurt themselves, or being able to hear them when they're talking about their difficulties, or listen to them yapping about their day. It's just having to do that 50% of the time, because that embeds in them this idea that you are safe and secure you're there when I need you, essentially. So I just say to myself, like, if I get 50% of this day feeling like I've connected in, I'm good.
Oh, 100%, because you're not a bottomless pit of of empathy and resource. You're also a human being. Like, there are some days when one of my children will be really tired, right? And they'll be bumping into things, or they'll be, like every little thing sends them over the edge. Like every 5 minutes, you're like, I hurt my finger on something, or like, this isn't working, or like, and it's, I find it really taxing. So I'm like, oh my goodness, they're looking to me like every single time for this kind of emotional regulation. And I'm like, I don't have that much. I can't be there to regulate you every 5 minutes when you're tired, because I'm not a bottomless pit, right? Like, it's.
But that's also a beautiful piece of parenting, is allowing them space some of the time to find their own self-soothing skill. You've already, let's say 50% of the time, you've modeled to them, like, this is how I can regulate you. And like, now you can do it too, because you also, of course, you wouldn't, I'm not trying to scare anyone, but sometimes if we're too overbearing, oh my gosh, are you okay? We can foster in them anxiety, in which they feel like, I'm not safe in the world unless my mum is there. And so
they can't handle anything. That like, if they get these little bumps and bruises or something, and that everything is kind of this big deal that people are fawning about, it's like, actually, you can have a little bump or a bruise and a cut, and you can say, that'll be fine, because it will be. It's just a little, it's fine. And I do think that's important for kids to have those experiences too, to just be like, it is small, and I will be okay. And I don't need a lot of fawning over for this particular event, It's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tricky world out there. But as parents, like, all we want to do is bring up secure kids. So how can we help to foster those secure attachments with our babies and children?
It does feel quite daunting, for sure, thinking like, oh my gosh, the things that I do now do impact my child for the rest of their life. And that is like a really scary thought. I mean, for me personally, I had a really awful time breastfeeding. It just wouldn't work for me, and I got really unwell, like mastitis, so I couldn't breastfeed. And as much as I told myself before, like, if it works, that's great. If not, I'll go to formula. When I had to make that transition, it was so scary, and I panicked that he wasn't going to have the closeness to me, which of course now I know was not the case, but I was so scared about him not having the closeness to me or feeling rejected by me. And so it is such a daunting experience. And of course, actually, when I read the research, which of course I did, into this, it's the idea that actually it's not necessarily about the big things. It's about the small moments over time that really accrue and create secure attachment. So I could have breastfed him but been totally absent, and that might have ruptured our connection more than me not breastfeeding him but being engaged with him by feeding him a bottle. And even for mums who have experienced postpartum depression, I mean, that is such an awful thing to go through, and of course can be a really challenging time to connect with your child. It doesn't mean it's all over. You can repair and rebuild over time. That attachment is something that we grow and develop across the lifespan. So I think all this to say, there are like 3 kind of areas that I think are really important to focus on. The first of them being boundaries. So we want to teach boundaries and self-regulation to our children. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Matilda, is like, where's the line? Like, when do I step in and when don't I step in, and how do I allow you to self-regulate? So one is self-regulation. So how can I mirror to you, like, gosh, yeah, that must be really hard. I'm not punishing you for bringing up how you feel. The other is about structuring environment. So creating an environment which is predictable and that they feel they understand. Even things like consistency in bedtime routine or the way that we have dinner, or those sort of things can be really helpful for children. But most importantly is just trying to be as responsive as we can and as engaged as we can. And look, that doesn't mean that you have to be switched on all the time, because you actually just physically cannot be. Like, sometimes a sweet relief of them entertaining themselves so you can just, I don't know, stare blankly at a wall. It doesn't mean that you have to be on all the time. But when they need something, you're there. And that's really all you can do to try and set those foundations, is just be warm and responsive and give a shit.
Yeah. It's so good. And because I was going to ask, if there's one thing that we can make sure we do in any relationship with someone that we're attached to forge a greater sense of security and a secure attachment with them, what would you recommend?
Listen.
Oh,
always listen. Everyone just wants to be heard. And when we're, particularly in intimate partner dynamics, we get so stuck on wanting to get our point across that we don't hear what they're saying. So I think it's about, listen and hear.
It's so true. So many fights and arguments could be solved if we focused more on listening rather than wanting to be right?
That is a shame.
Yeah, and wanting to win, because if someone wins, we both lose.
I love that. What a great way to finish.
Yeah.
Oh, Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I feel like each and every listener can get something from this episode. So thank you for your knowledge and sharing it so openly with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, well, we'll have you on again. You've been wonderful.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Next time we want to dive into we could do a couples issues Q&A, couldn't we? That could be fun. That could be fun.
We could just do a maths debrief episode.
Oh, I'd love to.
I haven't even watched it, but I have seen some on Instagram. Yeah.
Extraordinary characters.
Incredible.
Anyway, that's another episode. Victoria, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and knowledge and being here to share this with all of us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. And we will see you same time, same place. Well, maybe next week.
Take care out there. Matewa.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we'd love your support to keep making the show. The best thing you can do to help is subscribe by hitting follow in your podcast app and leaving us a little 5-star review. You can also now watch and subscribe on YouTube and check out how these millennials are keeping up with the cool kids on TikTok and the gram. Lastly, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can keep building this supportive community, keep giving you untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
Don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order. Lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people who make this podcast possible. Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, Maxine London Creative for editing this episode, and Lana Byrne for creating our social content. And to you, our listeners, Araha nui, take care. We'll see you soon.